Welcome back to Tiny Grimes Games, and I'm here with another Star Wars Destiny video. And today I want to talk about 10 tips for building competitive decks. Alright, so let's start at the top. Tip number 1. I really think, and I've come around to this myself, that you want to start with a deck that has 4 dice to start the game. I know there's some competitive decks out there that have 3 dice to start the game. Elite Vader, Raider's not a bad deck. Elite Luke, Akbar's not a bad deck. But more and more, I have been convinced that 4 dice is where you want to be at. It's just too easy to control one of those opening 3 dice. Like if you have just one character with 2 dice and then a random chud, and they can easily control one of those dice, it's just a slow way to get rolling. And so, you know, great examples of this are like Elite Django, Double Trooper, Django, 2 die Bala Trooper. That one extra die on Bala Tick, which is not an amazing die, it really helps just having that one more die. And more I've come around to just, if a deck doesn't have 4 dice, I'm just not that interested. So I would say start there. I mean, don't be afraid to use 3 dice decks. There are some good ones. But if you're on the fence about a deck and it only has 3 dice, just move to a 4 dice deck. I think that's the way to go. All right, tip number 2, very closely associated with tip number 1. Dice generally win games in this game. So you want to have as many dice as you can to start the game, and then you want to be able to ramp into more dice pretty quickly. So what this means is you want to have some cards that you can play in the early game that give you dice. Like you don't just want to have like holocrons, mind probes, force lightnings, force throws, where it's like, all right, it's all or nothing. I'm either going to get them or I'm not. I also think more and more I've come away from this idea that you can play like a Vader Raider deck without upgrades. I think you can. It's one of the few decks that you can do that. But even that deck, more and more I've been thinking, I want to put upgrades in this. I want to find a way to put some sort of upgrades, even if it's only on the hunt, which is a 1-cost upgrade, but it's still giving you dice. It's still doing things. It's giving you options. Dice are what win games. It's a very obvious approach to the game, but I like to have like a minimum of 12 upgrades. I've had several decks where I go 16, just because there's like, especially with holocron packages, it's much easier to get a whole big pile of upgrades in your deck. But you want dice, and you want to be able to play them early, not just late game. All right. So again, closely associated with that is tip number 3, which is know your curve. And what I mean by that is what I was talking about before. You need to have an assortment of cards at different price points for your dice. You can't just have crime lords and mind probes. You need to have a way to get up to those dice. You can't just basically pass the first couple turns saving money, assuming that it won't get taken away from you and that you won't fall too far behind. You will, and you will. So you need to be very careful about having ways to ramp up to this. A great example is if, let's say, you have Rey in your deck, even like a Han Rey deck. I've seen more and more of these decks putting in 2 copies of Rey's staff. Rey's probably going to die, and so you might look at that and go, I don't know, that's not a great fit. And I can understand that sentiment. But the issue is the Han Rey deck is short on weapons. There just aren't that many weapons, and there can be games where you don't have any. And so by being able to slot one more card in that 2 slot so you can just play it on any turn also becomes a good ramping point for one with a force. You don't have to just come up with 4 all of a sudden or 3 all of a sudden for force throw. You can overwrite. This kind of playing and knowing how your deck is curving out and how you're going to build into expensive upgrades rather than just hoping to get the money for them, it's really important. So if you have a deck that's really heavy on expensive upgrades, take a close look at that. See if you can find a way to put cheaper things in. Maybe a data pad doesn't exactly fit what your deck is doing, but maybe you wouldn't mind having that early. Maybe it lets you get a couple dollars while you're just sort of waiting to be able to ramp that into something bigger. Think about this kind of thought process as you're putting together your decks. All right, tip number 5 is maybe the most important one. Probably should be number 1. It is have a plan and aggressively pursue it. So this is what I mean. Recently, I had an article go up on FFG's page, and it had a deck that I made, early December. And I'm looking at it, and the deck's not very playable. And I'm trying to figure out, like, what was I thinking when I thought this deck was good? And I'm realizing the problem with the deck is not that it doesn't have good cards or it doesn't function. It's that it has a lot of cards that don't aggressively pursue a plan. It just plays good cards, gets some money, maybe it'll be able to redeploy. Those decks used to work just fine. Back when the meta was unevolved, decks weren't very refined. Now the way decks work is, if you screw around just doing some stuff, you're going to die. Decks do lots of damage really fast. So what I'm not saying is everyone needs to play an aggro deck, right? Like Django Veers is a great example of a plan that is aggressively pursued. I am going to kill you, and I am going to pursue this aggressively. You can also pursue a Crime Lord deck aggressively, or other alternate strategies, but you have to do them aggressively. Like, for instance, a mill deck needs to mill really, really fast, right? It can't be like, oh, I'll mill a card here, I'll mill a card there. Every turn I'm activating Vader, I'm choking a card. Like, that is not a viable mill deck. A viable mill deck is something like Padme, Akbar, also with the battlefield milling, and everything you're doing is being pushed towards that mill approach. I'm also not saying you have to have all your decks be one-dimensional, but I am saying you need to have a plan and be very clear about your plan. Your plan can't just be, I've got play the odds, I'll get a little dough, and then I'll play some upgrades. Like, we're past that. Your deck has to do something, and it has to do it efficiently and aggressively. And the easiest way, of course, is just damage. So, yeah. Another thing to talk about is that almost all decks need to do damage these days. I mean, that's been a big revelation for me in a negative way. I really like control decks. I like decks that I can more kind of sit back, control what's happening, react to my opponent, make them have to think about what I might have in reaction to them. And the way the meta is situated right now, that's not that viable. It's hard, real hard to build a high-level competitive deck that just doesn't do damage. I'm not saying it has to kill all of their guys, right? Like, you could still pursue a Crime Lord deck, but I think even in a Crime Lord deck, even in a mill deck, it's very useful to be able to put out enough damage to kill one character. It's this whole premise of dice wins games, right? If you see a character with 2 upgrades on them, and suddenly they're rolling 6 dice, it's going to be real hard to play a stall plan against that deck. You need to be able to step in and handle one of these characters, preferably the one with the damage on them. That's why, for instance, if I'm running like a Dooku Jabba deck, I'll often put up to maybe even 2 copies of Kylo Saber in it. Even if I'm milling, like a straight mill deck, I'll have 2 copies of Kylo Saber, maybe a Force Training and a Force Throw. All these cards that can do damage enough to maybe kill a Veers or kill a Django, just to slow them down enough to where I can enact my plan. It's become more and more unlikely that you can sit back and just simply react to your opponent. While that might be how I want to play the game, it doesn't mean it plays like that. So remember that as you're building your decks. All right. The next tip is to usually you want one type of damage. I used to say it didn't matter quite as much, but that was in a slower time. I mean, now things happen fast. You can't have wasted turns. You just can't have turns where you're like, that didn't really work out. It needs to work out. A good example of when this can work anyway is something like Han Rey, but that's mostly because it's an all-gun deck, and Rey's 2 dice are not really dice. She's more in there for her ability, for the ability to put one with a force on her when they kill her. Then you're getting that card. That's her main function. I've often found myself putting Awakening in that deck to sort of mask the fact that her dice are kind of a problem. They become better when you can do the +2 melee side. And you still will run into problems occasionally where Han only has 2 damage sides. If you've got 2 jetpacks on Han, and you roll Han, and it's not damaged, those 2 jetpacks are worthless. Whereas if Rey had range damage on her dice, she could really fix that. And so more and more I've been finding I really want to have the same type of damage on all my dice if possible. And I think that's one of the reasons why the Django decks have really vaulted to the top. Other than that melee side on Django, those decks are just all guns. They're all guns. It's very unlikely you're going to get in a spot where you just don't roll any base guns with all those guns around. It becomes really powerful. And it's a reason why I think Kylo Dooku is so good. It's all melee damage, and you always will have melee damage. So lean towards one type of damage. I mean, if you have this amazing idea and there's a plan that doesn't necessarily have to have one of the characters resolving damage, that can work. But I'm saying, generally speaking, you want one type. All right, next tip is, this is kind of a basic one, but include all the best cards from each faction. And maybe not everyone fits into all of your decks, but you should probably be looking on something like Star Wars, Destiny, DB, just looking at the red decks if you're making a red deck and see what seem to be the best cards. Like, Dug In goes in red decks. I can't, at this point, I can't fathom a red deck that would not run Dug In. I just can't. Like, my deck's really slow, though. I don't usually get the battlefield. Okay. Maybe that one turn you give up 2 dice for 3 shields to keep your guy alive for 2 more turns. Maybe that's worth that. That's a good example. Another good example is something like Electroshock. It just goes in every yellow deck unless your deck has yellow with 1 yellow character that's the clear target and has very low health. Maybe then you don't put it in. But the bottom line is identify those best cards and make sure you're figuring out a way to include them. That's often the reason to use that color, is to really be able to exploit those best cards. Another tip, you're going to want dice control. I mean, even if you have a fast deck, even if you're playing like Vader Raider, you're like, I want to punch him, I want to clean the battlefield and be done. Not quite. You need to be able to control their dice to some degree. You know, this is where something like He Doesn't Like You is still bonkers good in Vader Raider. Yeah, Vader Raider wants to play No Mercy. It wants to have all blue cards, but you know what? He Doesn't Like You's just real good. You're gonna have that moment where you need to control one of their dice. So you're gonna want dice control in every single deck you build. Some decks are gonna be heavier on dice control. Some will be lighter. But I think it's foolish to ignore all dice control no matter what your deck is doing. Another tip is understand the meta. And this is a really interesting point because, first of all, metas shift. And second of all, metas are different in different places, right? So my store, online, your store, going forward, these metas are probably going to be very different. Right now, I feel like they're not. Like, right now, it's pretty clear that lots of shields going around. Dug In is a very popular card. Most decks are going to have shields. You want shield busting. That's just like a meta call that you need to do. Guns, wildly popular. The burstiest decks are running guns. Therefore, I put a dodge in every deck. If you ask me in a vacuum, hey, Tiny, what do you think of dodge and block? I don't really like those cards. If you say, hey, Tiny, what do you think about dodge in a deck in a meta where everybody's playing Django? I say, sign me up for dodge. Dodge suddenly becomes great. So it'll be interesting when we get Spirit of Rebellion if the meta will become a little bit more diverse, if only some decks will have shields, only some decks will have guns. But right now, I think if you're going to build a really competitive deck, you want some sort of shield busting, or at least a knowledge that your opponent is going to be going after shields and having a plan for how am I going to deal with that. And I think you need to plan for guns. I mean, what happens if your opponent rolls out 13 points of damage? You can't just think, I'll control 1 die. Like, you need to have a way to handle that. And maybe it's, mind trick. Maybe it's misdirection. Maybe it's dodge. Whatever your plan is, you need to have a plan for the meta that you will be facing. Don't build decks in a vacuum because they seem like little engines, right? A deck is not an engine. A deck isn't a deck that functions well just when you're goldfishing. It really needs to be reacting to what the metagame is looking like. And that's a lot easier right now when that metagame is pretty well defined. Last tip for the day, net decking is fine. Don't beat yourself up. Don't feel the need to apologize if you went online, downloaded a Django Veers, went and kicked everyone's butt and won your tournament. Don't feel like, oh, that doesn't really count. I stole that deck from online. No. There's only so many decks you can even build with a limited card pool, A. And B, net decking is fine. Some people are great at building decks. Some people are great at executing the proper play. Some people are great at both. If your skill is not necessarily building great decks, don't feel bad about that. That's only part of the game. One thing I would say, though, if you're going to net deck, know the deck well. Don't just be like, oh, here's a deck that won a tournament. I'll just play it. Understand, what is this deck trying to do? What is the function of each card in the deck? If you don't know the function of a card and it's a tournament-winning deck, there probably is a function for that card and you're just missing it, right? Don't just immediately cut it because you say, that's a bad card. Think about what its function is. And I also love to, I don't want to say never say never. I usually do not straight net deck decks. Even if I'm thinking like, oh, I really feel like I need to play Elite Han Leia just to help build my tier list. I rarely will just go grab one, right? I'll look at a couple and sort of see like what are people having success with, and then I'll tailor it a little bit to a plan maybe that I'm enacting. But the bottom line is, net decking is fine. Don't feel dirty. Don't feel bad. Feel free to net deck. And hopefully you found these tips useful, and I'll see you next time on Time to Grams Games.